So you liked this controller, but you want more. Well, lucky you, because there are version 2s that have just arrived. Now, if you haven't seen the previous video, I showed you these. These are DOIO leverless controllers. Here we have the V2 versions, and they promise to be twice as good for twice the price. Just kidding, they don't cost anywhere near as much as twice as much. This is the successor to the DOIO standard. Get it out of this, it's not sliding. This time it's a nice black color, but it has different buttons. These are not, they don't have concentric circles like the textured version before. The screen is in the same place, the buttons are the same layout. It just has different buttons here. These are actually nice and squishy. I say nice and squishy. I'm not sure if this is really an upgrade. These buttons did make it feel a little bit clunky when you were double tapping and you would kind of snag on another button if it was too close. But with the new buttons, it definitely feels like that issue has been alleviated. They're flat buttons, but they've got soft edges. Everything else looks very, very similar. But what is this? It now has a volume rocker switch. So this standard model, which was $110, it now has gone up to, I think, $130. Let's get rid of that. So I was a little confused. Before they had the standard and the standard with the wrist rest. Now they have the standard V2 and the Pro V2. So this is actually the sequel to the split pad layout that they released before. And unfortunately, the key switch removal tool that they sent me has been split in half. It's actually quite weighty. It can actually damage other parts inside the box, so be careful about that. Not that that's something you can be careful about. This is actually what the HitPad Pro used to look like. It is a split button layout, and it's very similar to this, but the main big differences are instead of using these big flat buttons with concentric circles, they have gone for these rounded buttons. Anyway, time to try them out. We've got the HitPad Pro, the HitPad Pro V2, and this one, the standard V2. All right, let's actually test it out in some gameplay. I've got Street Fighter 6 here. Just want to point out that all of these controllers were sent to me by the company for the purposes of making this video, but I wasn't instructed to say anything specific about them. All opinions are my own. It is very, very similar to the previous design, but the main difference is that these buttons are completely different. You did snag on them if you were double tapping, but on the new one, that does not happen because, well, it's not that it doesn't happen. It just happens a lot less, because you don't really feel as much of that rectangular edge. In gameplay itself, it feels pretty good. It feels much nicer to be able to slide your fingers over. Also, if you are the type of person that does certain moves that involve like sliding your finger over these buttons, you now can. Other things you may notice is the lighting looks a little bit different. You can kind of see the LEDs quite brightly in between these gaps of the buttons, but still, I'm not keen on controllers where the gap here is the only place where you can see the LED. And also, because these LEDs are really bright, they do kind of glare in your eyes. So personally, I feel like it's a step backwards in terms of the lighting. We really can't see. Whoa, wait, hang on a second. So this rocker switch seems to be dedicated to changing the lighting. So if I can change the lighting at any point. I don't need to go into a special secret menu or anything. Get the brightness to phase up and down on the various colors. I can also have this rainbow mode. I'm not sure if the previous version could do this. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. For only $10 more, this is definitely a significant upgrade. So if you push it in, it switches it off. Push it in again, comes back on. So rocking it to the right will shift through the different patterns, and rocking it left will just turn up and down the brightness. Let's have a disco party. Now, I wanted to have a slightly more in-depth look at the controller, but I went on the website and actually it looks like the manual is nowhere to be found. It links to a Shopify website. It says the preview link has expired. One thing that is curious is that it says on the website there's a wrist rest version with a detachable wrist rest, but as you can see from the controller they've sent me, there is no such thing. It doesn't look like there's even a place where you could put a detachable wrist rest. Maybe that's a feature that they were hoping to add, but then didn't. In any case, I don't feel like this controller really needs a wrist rest anyway. I quite like how wide it is. Not all of these leverless controllers actually give you this extra space on the sides, but this makes it significantly easier when using it in your lap. Something that didn't work on the previous controller, when I pressed the turbo button, turbo didn't work, but fortunately on V2 it looks like they've fixed that. Before we try out the Pro V2, let's try out the Pro V1. Pro V1 is actually called that because it has a split layout. As far as I can tell, in every way, it is similar to the standard V1 controllers, but it has a split layout. The way I have it set up is that this is jump, this is also jump. It means you have 3 jump buttons. You got a jump button here, a jump button here, and a jump button here. It's a little bit excessive, but you have a huge number of buttons at your disposal now. This button here, the right thumb jump button, this is the same size as all the other buttons. So if you're like reliant on the size of the button so that you don't get lost, maybe that could be a thing. Now, it is a split button layout, but it is a very subtle split button layout. It's not a very wide expanse here. Like you could see, like if it were only like a centimeter closer, it would be the same as just the standard layout. But every little bit helps, so if moving your hands out a little bit like this, if that's all you want, then this is going to be perfect. You can of course go into the custom firmware. I have more details on that sort of thing in my extra video where I talk about all of these cheap leverless controllers and all the stuff that they have in common, because most of them are using the same PCB on the inside. It's the GP2040CE custom firmware. But just like the standard controllers that I reviewed before, performance is exactly the same. Unfortunately, it has the same issue as the original standard controllers, where turbo and a button doesn't actually turn it into turbo mode. Honestly, I think this is quite a nice controller to choose if you want something that is a bit weightier. This thing is like mostly aluminium, but something that you can't see from the top because it's the old design, so you can't really see the lighting very much through the top, is that actually it does have full-on lighting on the back. And even when you press these buttons, it does cause the main array of lights to change, but also the per button lighting also changes. See, I've got the rainbow mode here, but I don't know how to get it to spin around like the V2s because the acrylic layer is so very thin. You really don't see any of the lighting from the side of the controller. But in any case, if you want to save a little bit of money, it's $129 for this, the original Pro model. Let's bring in the oh so colorful version 2, which I feel like it's actually heavier. Lighting is much brighter from the front, and this is probably because of the new button design. There's more of a gap. And you also have plenty of wrist space on these Pro models. The buttons do feel very, very inset. They feel like they've got the same amount of travel as this, the standard V2, but they go much lower down, which means that, just so you can see nice and clearly, this button, it basically gets buried inside the controller. And I'm going to be quite honest with you, I don't really like the feel of it. I do like that it has these new buttons, but it makes no sense for the button to actually get like buried into the controller after I've fully depressed it. Maybe that gives a slight impression of the controller having like really low action, but it's the same action as the standard controller. Here's another thing that's a bit weird about having the buttons so inset. When you press 2 buttons at the same time, you really feel this lip here in between the buttons. This rim really digs into your finger, so it's like normally pressing 2 buttons at the same time is fine because you're just pressing 2 buttons at the same time, but because they go all the way into the controller, it's almost like this metal bit in the middle actually comes up and digs into your finger, and that's where there's like a bit of bone here. Yeah, that doesn't feel nice. It doesn't have that rocker switch for the lighting, which means that I think our lighting options are governed by pressing select and start, and then just pressing a couple buttons like so. Just like the standard V2, turbo has actually been fixed. Just like on the original Pro model as well, you can see it's got a very thin layer of acrylic here. It's $20 more than the original Pro, but they haven't really changed anything apart from make the buttons a little bit worse. Now, these keycaps are definitely nicer, but the fact that they go all the way into the controller, causing this metal rim to like dig into your fingers, that's kind of, that's actually a bit of a step backwards. All right, I think it's time to give you my final opinion on all of these controllers now that I've tried all of these DOIO hitpad controllers. My main opinion is that the standard version has definitely been improved. I really like these buttons. I prefer them to the original buttons because obviously sliding your fingers over them now doesn't cause much pain, and also being able to double tap, that's super nice. But really, for only $10 more, they've upgraded not just the buttons, they've also improved the lighting, which means that with this new rocker switch, you have a dedicated switch for just the lighting modes, and I think that's actually quite cool. So if you have to choose between the V1 and the V2, just get the V2. But then the less clear choice, which is the Pro. The split layout is quite nice. It's not very split, but if you only want a slight split layout, then actually this is quite nice. And $129, this is a really inexpensive controller, and you get that split layout, and you get a heavy-duty controller. This thing feels nice and heavy. It's definitely not going anywhere. It's got some non-slip corner padding over here, so it's not going to slip around. It does have that old button design, but honestly, I don't think it's a problem. And with Street Fighter 6, I don't really double tap that often. So if I had to choose, I would definitely choose this one over the new version. Now, the reason I'm choosing the old version is not really because, like, it's not worth it for the new version. It's just that the new version is just genuinely not as good as the previous version. It does have these new button caps, which is quite nice, but the way that it's been designed is that the case just comes up too far, which means that when you press these buttons down, you double tap and you actually feel metal like grating into your fingers when you double tap. And even if you're not double tapping, if you're just pressing two buttons at the same time, the whole button goes down, but then it feels like the surface of the metal comes up and digs into your fingers. And all of this for an increase of $20. Sorry, it's an increase of $30. They've gone from $129 for the original Pro version to $159, which is $30 more expensive for this one, and it's actually a step backwards. So really what I want to say all in all with these controllers is that, one, you should definitely check out my other video where I talk about cheap leverless controllers in general and whether you should be buying them, and if you are going to buy them, what are the pros and cons and what you should look out for. And what bugs me is that a lot of these cheap leverless controller makers, they're just going through products so quickly. They're just like, instead of testing them and seeing if they have issues, they're just selling them. Like, okay, we made a new version, we're selling it. Okay, it had some issues. Just axe it, sell the next one, and axe it, sell the next one. And this is very, very common. I don't know exactly what the terminology is, but you see it a lot on Amazon or AliExpress or other sites where companies have access to a design, they make some small changes to it, and then they just release it, and they just see how many they can sell. And if it doesn't really succeed, they just move straight on to the next model. But I think putting a bit more thought and effort into a single model and then just releasing much less often, like the weird thing about these DOIO controllers is that before I could even release the videos for this one, like, they came in the post, and then literally like a week later I got an email saying, oh, by the way, we've actually released new versions. It's like, but you just sent me, like, a week ago, you just sent me the previous version. So I think jumping straight onto the next model without thinking too hard, I don't know, you just end up with something like this, where the product is genuinely not as good as the previous version. The good news, however, is that you don't have to buy the new version, because they still sell the old I think they still sell the old version. So as long as you don't mind these weird button-shaped caps, this is a very compelling controller as well. I don't feel like this split layout is split enough to really justify going for this one, and also I don't really think that wrist rests are necessary on controllers like this. So personally, I think the winner here is the V2. Do you have any questions, anything you'd like to know more about these controllers? Do I need to make another follow-up video so I can explain a few more things to you, or maybe I should do a live stream and I can talk to you, I can answer your questions live? Let me know in the comment section below. Check out this video next if you love fighting games and leverless controllers or pad controllers and arcade sticks and all that great stuff. I've been NihongoGamer. I'll see you real soon.